what do we know right now about, the basic details that I always call you and ask you about? How much money does Argentina have left to back up the peso? How much money has the U.S. Treasury spent to back up the peso? And how much are we willing to spend to help them further?
I mean, those are all really good questions. And, it's a bit surprising in a way that we've put together this program because, in emerging markets, when you have these countries that have an overvalued currency and you start to get stresses on the system, if things break on the foreign exchange side, things can get pretty bad pretty quickly. And the $20 billion headline number, if things really go sideways, won't be enough to sort of stop the bleeding. What is expected is that there'll be some sort of conditionality, that you move the ban and then you float the peso. And if Malay starts heading towards some kind of dollarization, what you want to avoid is what happened in Ecuador when they dollarized. Interestingly enough, the president at the time was this guy Jamil Mawad, so he had same initials as Javier Milei, and there was an overvalued sucre, some plans for a dollarization process, which Milei brought up quite a bit in his campaign prior to the election, but Mawad lost control of it. They ended up dollarizing, but after a very disorderly devaluation, and it cost Mawad the presidency of Ecuador. So quite a few pretty accomplished economists have been opining on this and what needs to be done to stabilize the situation in Argentina. The headline number that the U.S. has won't be enough if it's disorderly. If there's a very well executed plan of sort of a step-by-step devaluation, I think you can get the situation in order. A concern I think some people have is Trump coming out today and sort of tying the follow-through on the aid to the election results, the upcoming election. And I think there's a bit of an underappreciation sometimes in D.C. That, if the U.S. is too prominent,
right,
it can be a disadvantage. There's an undertone of anti-imperialism in Latin America that people don't pick up. So let's see how the elections go. And I would assume, obviously, Secretary of the Treasury Bessent knows about the valuations, and I would expect that there's a thorough plan on how to achieve some stability in Argentina.
Well, Hans, to that point, what is your best guess as to what happens on the 26th when we finally get to those midterm elections? You make the good point that too much of anything is probably a bad thing. That could be the case with American support. But what the U.S. has done so far, what they've provided so far, do you think that's enough to get Milei over the line?
But yes and no. If you sort of sequence the announcement of the numbers and a program, clearly the market rallied when the details of the program started coming out. But you're dealing with a country that's been through quite a few of these cycles, and you don't have to look back too far back to see what happened under Macri when there was the IMF bailout, and they still had to go through a pretty severe restructuring. There needs to be a plan behind it. And again, it's not necessarily a positive that the U.S. is making themselves so prominent right now. It's also, you see a pretty big disconnect between some of the headlines that you see about the Argentina elections, the Buenos Aires election, what's coming up now, in the Argentine press versus what you see here. A lot of the spin around Buenos Aires was voters reject market reforms. If you talk to people in Argentina, it's, corruption around Milei and sort of a lack of empathy. And the spin with him is this, there is this guy campaigning with Wall Street or with the Argentine population. So we'll see if there's any change in polling numbers. But my concern is that election results won't benefit Malay, and it would not be a good thing for the U.S. to pull back too much and too obviously if the election results don't go the way Malay and Trump want.
We don't have to get into the bribery allegations, but suffice to say, you know, Javier Milei and his sister Karina have had some issues along the lines of Tom Homan, and they were supposed to be cleaning out the corruption. I wonder, Hans, why the U.S. would be so interested in helping out Argentina, besides the fact that Trump thinks it's one of the most beautiful countries he's ever seen, and besides the fact that, you know, he likes Milei, and especially that Milei likes him. Is this to sort of stop the dominoes of Chinese communism spreading, or is it to get Argentina to refine our rare earth minerals? Why do we want to help them so badly?
I mean, I think there definitely is a sense of sort of teaming up with leaders who are ideologically aligned with Trump, and, you know, to some extent, leaders in Latin America that are seen to be right-wing. Bukele, Noboa, Milei are going to get more of a benefit with the Trump administration than, you know, left of center politicians. But the China question is a good one. Going back to your prior segment, who's filling in the gaps on the soybean exports to China right now? It's Argentina. So the Chinese stopped buying soybeans from us, started buying them from Argentina. So, you know, we are playing, the United States is playing this in a lot of countries in Latin America, definitely in Africa, where any vacuum we leave, they step in and sort of fill the gap, where they'll find another area. In terms of locking in, you know, obviously lithium supplies, you know, quite a few rare earths. Argentina is a critical producer. And I think that strategically, it would be good for the U.S. to continue focusing on these countries that supply rare earths that we're going to need for the sort of next steps in, you know, AI, any kind of technology going forward.
Right.